Good evening and welcome to the second in Alexandra Palace's Culture Bubble webinar series, Culture Bubble Youth Voice. These webinars are a space for young people to discuss and explore activism in all its creative and cultural forms. You can watch our first webinar, Art and Activism series, through the link on Alexandra Palace website in the Creative Learning section. And today we'll be discussing youth voice and hearing from four young and inspiring activists, Ellen Jones, Eli Alvarado, and Tré Ventour and Daze Aghaji. And my name's Maz and I'll be hosting today. And I'm a member of the Young People's Programming team at Ali Pali, who have, amongst other things, organised this series of webinars. It's just about time to hear from our four activists, but before we start, I'd like to remind you that closed captioning is available, done live by one of our member of our team, Kadja, and if you'd like to use them. This webinar is also recorded, and please do remember to put any questions for the panel in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer as many as we can. So first up is Ellen. Ellen Jones is an award-winning campaigner who speaks and writes on LGBTQ+ rights, mental health, autism, and gender. In 2018, Ellen won the first ever MTV EMA Generation Change Award in recognition of her campaigning. In 2017, she was named Stonewall's Young Campaigner of the Year after running successful campaigns tackling LGBTQ+ inequality in schools and online. Covering queerness, disability, feminism, and digital culture, Ellen writes for a variety of publications. She was also the founding editor of Smiley News, a non-profit news outlet. She also writes a popular mental health themed newsletter called Reasons to Keep Going, which is published weekly. Ellen is also an established speaker discussing diversity and inclusion, LGBTQ+, autism and disability in media representation and youth activism.
That's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
It is. Thank you, Ellen. I'll be introducing, next up is Daze. So Daze Aghaji is a 20-year-old climate justice activist and political candidate and student. She studies history and politics at Goldsmiths University of London. Daze's advocacy for radical systemic change has seen her work with major NGOs, leading charities and grassroots change makers around the world. In 2019, she ran as a candidate in the EU parliamentary elections, being the youngest candidate to do so, and she has strong ties with Extinction Rebellion, a global environmental movement. The main focus of Daze's activism are regenerative culture, intersectionality, environment, youth political engagement, and social change funding. Daze has also recently become a trustee at the Blah Grave Trust. Hello, Daze. And next up is Eli. So Eli Alvarado is a 22-year-old British-born Latinx activist. Eli joined the social justice youth organising group, the Advocacy Academy, at 18 years old. And it was through the Advocacy Academy that she met the team that she's co-creating with her Latinx play, My Uncle Is Not Pablo Escobar, with. And by being part of this production, inspired her to begin combining art with her activism. Elizabeth is part of the movement that was successful in getting the Arts Council England to finally place a Latinx box on all their forms in the ethnicity section of their reporting and data collection, a massive step in making the Latinx community more visible in our society. 2020 was a pivotal year for all Latinx people involved in or hoping to join the arts community, and Eli is looking forward to more successful stories this year too. Hi, Eli. Tré isn't here yet. I've just seen a message, so we'll be introducing him slightly later. So first up, we are going to hear a little bit more from Ellen. So hello, Ellen, if you'd like to introduce yourself and talk about what you do.
Hello. So describing what I do is quite complicated. Essentially, what I do is don't sleep very much. By day, I'm actually just started a new job at a culture change business in a consultancy in diversity and inclusion. And by night, I am running a million projects, specifically at the moment around disabled LGBT people and sort of the intersections of disability and the LGBT community. But going back, I'm only 22. I graduated last year, and I didn't necessarily envision myself working in this space. And it kind of happened by accident more than anything else, or rather because I was really stubborn. My kind of understanding of myself as an activist and as a campaigner and as someone who had something to say that had social importance began really early. I grew up in a family where, you know, we weren't necessarily politically campaigning, but I was always aware that people had different life experiences and that we needed to essentially be compassionate human beings to people who don't look like us and who don't have, you know, the same beliefs and the same traditions. And it's surprising to me how many people I know didn't have that. And I was always encouraged to be curious. And then when I was 14, I came out as gay, and that in some ways was really received well. It was received well by my family, and it was received well by, you know, several of my friends. However, there was a specific group of people who bullied me relentlessly, and I spent about 18 months getting death threats from people that I knew at school, which was pretty traumatic. And then that kind of sparked my LGBT activism and then my mental health activism. And a lot of my work was around, I don't think we can talk about mental health in a vacuum, and it intersects with identities, it intersects with your experiences. And so that's kind of where that all started. And then just before I went to university, I got the sort of bombshell that I was autistic. I've been autistic since I was born, and no one had ever identified it. And for a bit of context, autism in girls is often not recognized because it can present slightly differently, and it can also present differently to people who aren't white, people who aren't cisgender, because essentially they base the diagnostic criteria on a very narrow norm. So lots of people aren't getting access to a diagnosis, and the diagnosis opened doors for care. And so a lot of my work is around education, it's around healthcare, it's around politics, it's around lots of different areas, but all of them are, it's basically to do with the ways that humans are diverse, and we should be including them in our systems, because oftentimes they haven't been. And at the moment, my project works specifically, I'm building a site specifically for disabled LGBT people, because there is nothing available. There is so little available, which is really strange to me, because I looked at the history, well, particularly the Western history of disabled people and the Western history of LGBT people, and they were really similar. There was huge similarities, and they were coming from the same kind of belief systems. I think we forget that in this country, it's still legal. Conversion therapy is still legal, for example. It's perfectly legal to treat being gay and being trans as a medical illness that needs to be cured, in the same way that lots of disability models that are frowned upon see disability as something to be cured. So a lot of my work is putting things together and kind of seeing patterns that other people don't recognize, which is, I guess, a skill that I've learned, but also just the way that my brain thinks. And certainly growing up, people would not necessarily be positive about that, especially in the education system. It requires you to think very rigidly and very on task and very linearly. And I'm not interested in linear thinking. I'm interested in big thinking that considers many issues at once, which is why it's sometimes hard to summarize what I do. But essentially, I run around trying to make the world a better place, and that might mean some days I'm deciding to make GIFs that now have like hundreds of millions of uses and views. It was really weird seeing Billy Porter use a GIF that you've made. That was a highlight. Just my brain had a moment then of just like, must have. Oh, and Brie Larson as well used one of my GIFs, which was
amazing.
But yeah, it's very weird, because I grew up with this kind of being very, very bullied and very, very lonely. And now I've created a space where I'm actually able to be seen as successful, and I'm actually happy, and I've got community around me. And part of that was, you know, moving out of my small town. Part of that was building online communities. And part of that was also just accepting myself, because I think it's easy to think that because I was very public about being gay and very public about my autism diagnosis and very public about the mental health issues I had, that that meant I was comfortable and confident all the time. And the reality is, when you deal with other people's response and negative response every day, you don't feel good about that. But I hope that people see me and are able to think that actually they, things might not be great now, but there is hope. Hope is literally my middle name. And if nothing else, that they can be their whole selves. One of the reasons that I'm not necessarily popular all the time or people won't work with me is that I refuse to compartmentalize myself, and I refuse to compartmentalize my identities. And people want you to be one thing, and unfortunately I'm not one thing. You can't talk to me about being autistic without talking to me about being a girl and being a queer girl. And my refusal to compartmentalize myself doesn't always make me the most popular, but it certainly makes me the most effective person, because ultimately I'm able to show up as myself. So yeah, that's what I try and do: create spaces where people can be themselves, just exist, and hopefully we can get to a place where it's not just survival for communities who are marginalized. I feel like everyone at the moment feels like they're just surviving, and that is also, there is a global pandemic, not sure if anyone's noticed, but hopefully we can get to a place where everyone can thrive, but that requires structural change. Essentially, we're going to change the world at some point.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It sounds like you're doing so many different things, and that was a lovely message as well, what you said at the end for what you hope for. Yeah, thank you so much. Next up, Daze, would you like to speak about you and what you do?
Yeah, I feel like similar to Ellen, I do lots of stuff, lots of little bits. Yeah, thank you, by the way, for sharing, because even me, I have learning disabilities as well. So it's always nice to see someone else in the space who's speaking. But me, I've actually ended up mostly focusing on climate change. So I think the only way you can fully understand it is actually by going to my youth. And I grew up in Tottenham, in North London, very close to Ali Pali, spent my weekends at Ali Pali. And at this time, my family actually lived in relative poverty in the UK. Me and my brothers and my dad and my mum shared this 1-bedroom flat just off White Hart Lane. Growing up, my mum always told us our job in life is to make the world a better place for the next generation, and that's what we should aim to do. And my mum did do that for us. She started her own business, and after this it actually made us quite middle class quite quickly, and we ended up moving to Edmonton, not too far, but very different to the 1-bedroom flat that we used to live in. And after this I ended up going to boarding school, and I was able to live in a boarding house, which was very unlike most boarding houses. It was a really small boarding house with 50 students, and I had the most amazing house parents who basically invited me to the environment. They taught me about nature and how to love nature, how to grow my own food, and how to take care of the planet. And through this experience, I was able to really find like grounding within what the environment means to me. But this didn't last too long, because when I came back to London for college, this was when I started getting really ill. I started experiencing a lot of respiratory issues and also skin issues. And I kept going to the doctor, and they were like, yeah, we don't know what's going on. Probably hormones. And I knew it wasn't hormones. So I actually ended up obviously doing the worst thing you could possibly do. And I was WebMDing the, crap out of it. But this is actually how I stumbled across climate change. I found out about the poisonous levels of air pollution all across London and how it's specifically affecting people of colour and people in marginalised communities. When I found out about this, I was, as you would imagine, angry. And in turn, finding out about how this isn't just an air pollution issue, it's a climate issue. The life that we're living is at risk. And I went, in all honesty, a couple of years doing the angsty teenage thing of being like, yeah, I really hate it, but I'm not really quite up to doing anything about it. But yeah, like F the government, right? But then in uni, after these years, I ended up meeting a friend, and she's actually my flatmate now, which is the funniest part. And she told me about this like protests that she went to, and she was like, yeah, we sat on roads and stuff, and they care about the environment just as much as you do, you know. And I've always been quite skeptical of a lot of environmental NGOs because they're telling us one meatless Monday is going to save the world, when I knew in reality that wasn't the case. So I thought it would be the same old stuff. They tell you light green stuff, it's all about the individual doing something. And then I met Extinction Rebellion, and I went to my first meeting, and it changed my life. And I don't want to say that to sound dramatic, but it did. At that point, I was in a very difficult stage. I was diagnosed with depression and also was battling through meningitis. And at this point, I finally felt heard, and not just in the way of realizing the urgency of the environment and hearing people say it's urgent too, but also in the emotional way of me being asked for one of the first times in my life from someone who I didn't know, how am I doing? And it was this level of care and level of truth telling that really spoke to me. So as you know, every very impulsive teenager does, I started working full-time with Extinction Rebellion after 3 days. And at this point, it was the run up to April, the big rebellion with the pink vote. And this point, I actually became outreach and logistics coordinator and started helping the creation of XR Youth, which is the youth branch that was meant to amplify youth agency and also bring the youth voice when it comes to climate change. And through then, we ended up doing April, having a really big protest. And then after that, I wasn't done yet. We saw that there was an election coming up, and we all thought it was really funny because it wasn't meant to happen because of Brexit. So we were like, so I remember I was there in the office just talking about it. And then the founder of XR went, Daze, would you like to run for Parliament? And I went, fuck yeah. And that was it. The next day, I was signing the paperwork to become a candidate for the race in the EU Parliament. And this, I think, this specific part of my life is actually quite character building, because this time I decided I didn't want to, you know, like I knew I wasn't going to win. So I was like, I might as well throw a campaign that's worth the party, you know. And this is when I decided that I wanted to do what politicians don't do and actually talk to people and create ideas and vision with communities on loads of different issues. Because, you know, climate change, in the same way that Eleanor was saying, disability isn't something that you can just look at in one way. You have to look at it holistically. So I did workshops about, you know, gentrification in areas like Brixton and Hackney and Dalston, right round to doing tea with your MEP candidate, of where I would go to people's houses and have chats and drink tea and bring cakes. Yeah. So after this experience, I ended up going back to XR and becoming the Youth Regenerative Culture Coordinator. And this was my real deep exploration of regenerative cultures. And just to go over what that means, because it's one of those terms that means everything but means nothing at the same time. Regenerative cultures is seen as a healthy and resilient way of living, and this can be different to everyone all across the world and to different communities. Within XR, the way that we saw it was that there is 5 main pillars of it. It's the self-care, and this isn't just the face mask Sunday or the going out for a run once in a while. This is the radical self-care of figuring out who you are, figuring out what part you play in society, and also how you can make society a better place. Working through emotional healing and ending generational trauma. And then you take your more healthy self and your more visual self and your more self-aware self into how you connect with people individually. And then once you've mastered that, you take it to your community and you learn how to hold each other and how to really care for each other, and also how to ask for help when you need it. And then we have a particular part for activists, so where we call it action care. This is the time of where you're really tested, that really intense moment of where you can say, I have a friend who's glued onto a floor, for example, and I'm going to read them poetry for a couple of hours. And if it rains, I'm going to put an umbrella over them. And if they're hungry, I'm going to feed them, and caring for each other in these moments. And through this learnt behavior of us learning how to care and act in love and duty, we end up doing the same to the planet. We end up learning how to love the planet in a way that it deserves, and in turn, hopefully, end all issues not just climate change, but racism, colonialism, sexism, and many, many more. So that kind of comes to the regenerative culture part. As of more recently, I've actually started going out and doing some stuff that is not related to XR, and this is through the social change funding, especially. I work at Belgrade Trust as a trustee there, as one of the youngest and one of the only Black trustees in the UK, which feels really great to say. We're coming up and we're going to be included. And I've been especially working on what's called the Challenge and Change grant, which is a seed grant that's given to young activists who are doing youth-led projects in many different areas. And we've been able to give funding to a young Black trans woman, also give funding to the Romani Gypsy community in their effort to make sure that they end stigma around their communities, and many more projects that are worthwhile, and working with them as partners in developing their ideas, and also some boring stuff like consultancy work. So that's kind of what I do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Daze. What a journey you've had from Tottenham and now back on this webinar with Ali Pali. Brilliant. So interesting, all the wonderful things that you're doing. I can also see Tré's arrived, which is amazing. Hello, Tré. If you want to turn on your camera, feel free to do so. We're going to go on to Eli next, and then we'll introduce Tré. So Eli, would you like to speak about some things that you do?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Thank you guys for sharing as well. I always find inspiration from hearing other activists and their stories, because yeah, activism, it's a funny thing. You don't expect to end up where you end up, and then 4 years down the line, you see yourself speaking in front of people that were your age, and it's like, whoa, what happened there? Like, when did I become this person? So yeah, it's been crazy. I actually didn't know what activism or advocating was. I would hear about protests and marches, but I wouldn't be involved. I didn't really think it was my thing. I didn't think politics was for me. I thought it was too smart. I was like, nah, I'm just a girl from South London, from Brixton. Like, I'm not even white, like working class, single parent, don't really know what that's about. But I did realize that I would always get angry at comments, like stereotypical comments about, being Latinx and working class. And obviously, as you grow up, especially in South London and Brixton, you start to realize the differences between the classes and how people treat you. And then at the age of, I think around 17, maybe, the Advocacy Academy, the co-funder came and gave an assembly about what it meant to be angry and what it meant to want to change that thing that you were angry about. And she said this one line. She said, if you're sitting in this room and you're angry about something and you understand what I'm telling you, then you need to join us. And I was like, oh, I was like, what? I felt so, it felt so personal to me. I was like, yes, I have to at least apply. I don't know if I'm going to get in. And that was when I joined the Advocacy Academy. I got in, I joined their whole program. When I was in the Advocacy Academy, the program was longer. So it was almost a year, I think. And then you graduate and you become alum, and we still work together now. We're still doing things together. We have collectives, like mental health collectives, climate collectives, a whole range of things. We've grown so much as a community. It was a blessing in disguise, honestly. The things that they teach you as an advocate, how to use your anger and turn that into fuel for change, instead of just going out and being like, F you, F this, whatever. Like, they teach you how to speak in a way that people in government will listen to you, in a way that if you make a campaign and you want to change something, you will end up changing that one thing. And you don't realize that. You don't realize the power of what you're learning until you win. And you're like, wait, did that really just happen? Like, did those people in government really just sit down and listen to what we had to say? And it's when you find yourself in that room with those important people that you really kind of see the power that you have as a person, but not just as a person, as a community. And that was so so important for me. That's where it began. That's where my activism journey began. It's where I met my Latinx friends, you know, other people from different cohorts. And we kind of built that community, that Latinx kind of fight for recognition for our rights as a community within the UK. We want to be seen, we want to be acknowledged, you know, like every community, every ethnicity within the UK has so much to give that not being able to have a box in the ethnicity section on a form is like, I'm sorry, why aren't we there? Like, we're here, we're a big community, we exist, our numbers are huge, and yet we don't have a box on the ethnicity form. If data were to be collected, we don't exist. We don't exist in data, we don't exist in universities because we tick other. So last year for the Royal Arts Council for the Arts Council England to finally say, okay, fine, we give in, we'll put a box. It was like, yes, you better put a box because we've been fighting for ages. It was just like, not people don't understand. When I tell them, they're like, it's a box. Elizabeth, why are you so pressed? It's a box. I'm like, no, it is not a box. It's my identity. It's me, it's my kids. It's the people that came before me, you know? It's my mom who came to this country by herself and built a life for her and for me. Hello, we pay our taxes, we study, we're part of this community. Like, I don't understand. It's something that I think we deserve and is owed to us. So yeah, my journey as an activist has been crazy. I've done some crazy things, worked with amazing people, and now with the friends I have from the Advocacy Academy, we're actually creating a play called My Uncle Is Not Pablo Escobar. And we hope to put it on this year, but it's looking like maybe next year, we don't know. But it's so exciting, so exciting. And I just cannot wait. Latinx play, co-created, like, yeah, it's just, I cannot wait to share that with the world.
Thank you so much, Eli. That's really, really exciting. And we'll definitely give you time to promote that at the end as well. And yeah, wow, what a win as well with the Arts Council England box. Brilliant. So Tré can't put his camera on right now, but I'm just going to give his introduction. So Tré is a Northamptonian writer, poet, speaker, educator, and race equality activist. Tré is enthusiastic about anti-racism and social justice. His work heavily focused on racism, identity, Black British history, and inclusive curricula. Tré's passion for these subjects has taken him into his community, including the educational sector, healthcare, and criminal justice, delivering sessions to diverse groups, from young adults to grown adults. Young adults to grown adults, young people to grown adults, having conversations about Black history, race, and identity. Tré has a record of activism through organising community events with social justice theme at their core. Currently, during this time of uncertainty, he has been leading his ear to the community that raised him, helping them make sense of the racial issues intertwined with coronavirus, Black Lives Matter, and the recent events regarding the toppling of colonial statues. So Tré, if you want to turn on your mic and speak a bit about or share your slides with everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Tré.
I'm going to try and share my slides. But
brilliant.
So,
go for it.
Let's see.
Oh, we've already got a question on the Q&A. So please do remember that Q&A box is there and ask any questions that you have. Thank you, Georgina, for your first question. If you need Jen to share the slides as well, you can.
Yeah, it's annoying for me. Can Jen share the
Absolutely.
slides, please? Sorry.
That's absolutely fine. Jen, is it possible?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay. Does it go to like, does it fit the screen, or is that are the slides too big, essentially? Okay, yeah, that's fine. This first slide is a photo of me when I was interviewed by The Guardian last summer during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. I had made links with Black Lives Matter Buckingham in that July, essentially, and The Guardian picked up somehow that I was involved with that, and I was one of 50 Black people in the UK. Black young people in the UK interviewed on Black Lives Matter. There were people from Buckinghamshire and me in Northamptonshire, but also the West Country, Wales, Scotland, even the Forest of Dean as well. The Forest of Dean had a Black Lives Matter protest. Even historically white areas of the country had been impacted by the death or murder of George Floyd, and it hit a note with areas that historically didn't really do things along anti-racism. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I was born in 1995, so here I'm about 2 or 3 years old, and I was born into a West Indian family. Grandparents on both sides of my family are Windrush generation, born in the colonial Caribbean, and even to them, things like political activism, they lived it. A lot of them. Many of my family remember Brixton, the Brixton riots in 1981. They remember Lewisham in 77. They remember the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, even as 1999. So I was 4 years old when the Stephen Lawrence inquiry was happening, and I think my parents tell me this was one of the things that made the move out of London. That the murder of Stephen Lawrence was one of the triggers that made the move out of London, where I was born, and to Northamptonshire, where my mum's family are from. So to the next slide, please. So Black people of colour like me, to do this work, I sometimes feel a bit away about it, because my background it's a non-traditional background. For Black people in this country, not many of them would have gone to a private school, let alone 3 there. So left is the first school I went to, so that was Great Hatton Prep, then Wellingborough School, and then on the bottom left, got St. Peter's Independent. And I found that these places sort of set me up to be able to have these conversations in institutions of power as well. I think it's what Eli, the last speaker, was saying about how she was able to have these conversations because people took her seriously by the way she spoke. And school did that for me. They taught me basically BBC English, and that's the English that even in activism circles, activists that get taken seriously, quite a lot of them have to code switch. I think that's the term for it. Code switch and speak in a voice that these institutions understand. And this made university easier for me as well, another institution of whiteness. So I graduated Northampton University in 2019 in creative writing. Then I was a student union officer at Northampton for Black and minority students. And then now I'm doing a master's at Leeds Beckett in race and education and decolonial thought. But I grew up in privilege, in a manner of speaking, that I was able to go to these schools. But even within these schools, I was an outcast in many ways. Race, evidently, class, I'm from a working class background, but also disability-wise as well. So I have a learning disability, dyspraxia, but I'm also that comes under the wide umbrella of neurodiversity, which has stuff like ADHD and autism intertwined under that umbrella as well. So to the next slide, please. And yeah, I've mentioned my family already, but they're all activists. they won't call themselves activists, but my mum especially is a domestic abuse trainer, and the stuff that she encounters on a daily basis, helping her community, that in my opinion, many people would identify that as activism. On the left hand side, top left, is my grandfather, born in colonial Grenada in 1943. The stuff that he's experienced is like obviously obvious racism as part of the Windrush generation. Even just to exist as a Black person and to navigate society is I think that's a rebellious act. So it depends how far you want to stretch definitions of activism. Bottom left is my late Uncle Albert, my grandfather's brother, and when they came to this country, again, Windrush people, they brought with them their culture as well. And my grandfather, he plays steel drums. He still plays the steel pan. And it took a long time for English culture to get along with what Caribbeans did for this country. And now in a lot of spaces that is celebrated, but it wasn't always celebrated. And top right is my cousin Paris. And he's a writer as well, and the stuff that he talks about, and he's a lot like me in terms of how we think about race and equality issues. But he is also mixed race as well. So he brings another narrative to the race conversation. Mixed race is not talked about nearly enough in society. And to the next slide, please. Yeah, and to a further extent, I'm also mixed race. I found out a few years ago that my grandmother, on the furthest right picture on the bottom there, is a mixed race woman. I had no clue that she was mixed race. I didn't know. No one talked about it. I just assumed that she was a Black person, but it turns out that her father was a white man. So when you talk about mixed race experiences, there is very much a diverse plurality when it comes to mixed raceness. Not just Britain, but the Caribbean as well as a diverse number of islands. So far right is my grandma, on the bottom are my granddad. So that's my dad's parents. And then above them is my dad and my auntie. And then in the middle is my grandma's mum and my grandma's dad. And then on the far left is my grandma's mum again and her brother. And he's mixed race as well. But when you think about mixed raceness, how we talk about it, it very much comes with a narrative of you must be lighter skinned, essentially. But in that picture there, you can see that on one side you've got a very light skinned woman, on the other side you've got a dark skinned man and their siblings, and they're both mixed race. So I think that's worth talking about within itself. To the next slide. So I mentioned earlier dyspraxia. These are just some of the things that it can impact, and it impacted me a lot at school, to the point that I was written off by teachers as stupid and not capable, when in essence they just didn't know how to teach me. And that is quite a common aspect in our education system when it comes to Black students. Many of them are written off as stupid, and that's why there's such a massive awarding gap within our education system. So yeah, so that's dyspraxia. To the next slide, please. And when it comes to my activism, some people are more subtle about it. I can be subtle, but there are times when I'm not, and sometimes you have to speak out in a very public way. So these are 4 screenshots from various press publications. So top left is from my local Chronicle and Echo, where when I first came to be in my role at the Student Union in Northampton, and I said some things to the local paper about the university, and it wasn't specific to Northampton, but because I was at Northampton, they took it as specific, and it's not that it wasn't true. Representation is an issue within universities, and our institutions are incredibly white within higher education at a senior leadership level. And then on the right there, on the right-hand side, I called out a lecturer for having not done his research when it came to decolonizing the curriculum. And he didn't like it at all, but he hadn't done his reading. And this guy had a PhD in history. He was a history lecturer. And this is common in higher education. People seemingly with academic qualifications but aren't doing their research properly. Bottom left, from the Guardian article, and then bottom right, yeah, University Northampton management is very white, but this is not just Northampton, it's everywhere. So every higher education at a senior leadership level is incredibly white. Less than 1% of professors are from a Black background, and that is at a BAME level, be it Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, it's chronically absent at the top of our institutions. So yeah, to the next slide, please. This is from Black History Month 2019. This was the first time really Northampton had done Black History Month at a level that was what I would expect from a university or institution. I did about over 14 separate events. Some of them were small scale events like discussion groups, and other ones were more large scale like lectures and that sort of thing. And this is from the lecture I did on decolonizing the curriculum, looking at history of race in this country, and that's from Staying Power by Peter Fryer. So to the next slide, we're nearly finished. So yeah. October 2020, I talked at Stowe School in Buckinghamshire, another institution of whiteness. Stowe is a school that was built, the land around it was built off the money of the slave trade. So just to give you something to think about there, and I went in there and gave a talk on Black Lives Matter. So that just puts it into perspective. And then on the right, I talked at a demo by Black Lives Matter Buckingham. To the next slide. And now I educate institutions about race and Black history and those sorts of issues. And those are some of the places that I've done stuff for. So yeah, next slide. And that when it comes to activism, I think many of us have this idea that it's marching and demonstrations, but it's not. That's a very small part of it. It's what you do when you're not marching, and what you're doing at home, what you're challenging your families, racist family members and stuff like that, what you're doing in management meetings and things like that. And yeah, I'm also a writer, so I write for a number of publications, and those are some of them. And I'm being published this year in an academic journal, an academic book with my master's, which is about COVID and racism, the publication. So I wrote about people of color as agents of white supremacy, because I saw last year during October that the Black members of a certain party that like to rant about critical race theory and white privilege, and it upset me a lot. So yeah, I think that was the last slide. The next slide. Can we scroll down? Yeah. Yeah, Black Lives Matter, it's in the protests, but it's also in our institutions and what we do when we're not marching, and that's most of it. And I also organize events as well. So those are the posters to my events. So on the left, I'm doing a 2-part lecture on race and the literary canon, because race in canon, it threads through the whole of the literary canon and in very nasty ways. But no one really knows how to talk about it, and in schools we don't know how to teach it either. Bottom left is a poetry event on whiteness and white supremacy and white privilege, and then on the right is a discussion around books and literature, really encouraging young people to come to this event and children to share their favorite extracts from books and novels and poetry and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's me basically. I'm a writer, but I also not so subtly do activism work sometimes, and I think I do want to eventually go into academia at some point as well. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Tré.
Yeah.
What a brilliant presentation. It was so lovely to see the pictures as well. You've got so many events going on.
Yeah.
And doing a master's at the same time is so admirable, very inspiring. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. Hopefully we might be able to see Tré's face soon as well. So I'm just going to move on to the questions. So this first question is for everyone to answer if you like, and it is, what's it like being a young activist? Do you find that people take you less seriously because of your age? And if so, how do you deal with that? Or does your age have any advantages? So yeah, what's your experience of being a young activist? Who wants to answer first?
I mean, I'm happy to go on this. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. So I'm 22 now, but I've been kind of aware of social justice and those sorts of things from 14, 15, and getting actively involved since I was sort of 16, 17. So the entirety of my adolescence was essentially dominated by campaigning, and it was a really interesting time, specifically because I don't think 10 years ago we would even be having this event. Activism has not been historically popular, and it suddenly became something that was in the public eye, and I very much lived through that. But at the same time, I was always very angry because, especially with the work I was doing in education, the work I was doing in terms of healthcare, in terms of politics, and in terms of institutions, I always felt like you're glorifying these young people, when in fact young people often don't hold financial power, they don't hold political power, they don't hold positions that have the ability to make change. So, and oftentimes, you know, for me, it was a lot of my work was dependent on, or people believing my work was dependent on my trauma and sharing things that were really difficult and the horrific experiences I had. And that was the only way that they would basically shut up and listen. And so, although I'm very grateful to kind of be in the position that I'm in now, where I get to work with lots of communities and try and make things better, I was very furious about the fact that I was a teenager. When this stuff started happening, I was a kid. So I don't think it was right that on the one hand, I was being given platforms by the same people who, if they pulled their thumb out, they might actually be able to prevent the issues that I was going to have to talk about. And so that was really frustrating. In terms of the being young thing, I don't find it's as much of an issue for people as it is. People seem to forget that I was a teenager when I was a teenager. I think it was something to do with reading really wordy books. But what I get patronized for is being a woman and being disabled and being autistic. The amount of patronization you get, especially from old white men, essentially. I've had some really negative interactions, and it makes you very apprehensive about doing that kind of work again or going into that same space. And it can feel, you know, scary at times. But then at the same time, I'm also aware that I'm super white, and therefore I have leverage in those spaces, and I can get in those spaces and put the foot in the door essentially and hold it open. So it's always been a bit of a conflict. So yeah, for me, it's not so much been my age has been a barrier. It's that my relationship with my age has been made really weird, and other aspects of my character are made to be a barrier.
Thank you, Ellen. Just trying to unmute myself there. Anyone else wanna? I can see you've unmuted yourself. Yeah, Daze.
Yeah, I think being an activist, I think, I don't know, I always find it quite hard to say. It's actually really horrible sometimes. It's hard, it's not fun. I feel like I have, especially those, oh God, so hippie, but we were having a fire circle, which is basically a moment of coming together and figuring out, why do you do this? And I had a moment of realizing that I'm actually angry that I'm doing this. I've spent the last 2 to 3 years of my youth where I should have been like clubbing in Cavos and going to Ibiza, going to talk to politicians and gluing myself to floors, you know? So there is a part of me that I'm like, I'm really angry. And but also there's a part of me that really loves being an activist, and I understand that, like, I'm really thankful to be in a space that's been created like this. Like, for example, I actually have dyspraxia too, and ADHD and dyslexia, so I'm quite quite different as well. And in normal spaces they wouldn't have given me my 3Ds at A-level a second look, but in activism they pride me on what I can give, and I know that I can give my heart and everything to it. So I think that's a side of activism that I think is particularly quite beautiful. And also it's like the people you get to work with are just so amazing. I don't think I've actually gone past someone who I've gone, yeah, they're a horrible person. You know, I get to work with young people as young as like 10 or even less. I get to work with really old people, our elders who are, you know, I get to work with different races, different people with different abilities. And it's just a real beautiful, diverse working space to be a part of. And I think that, especially as someone who, like, you know, I've got like people love me because it's like, if they're going for inclusion, I am Black, I'm a woman, I'm queer, I am neurodiverse, I come from a working class background. So it's like, but also this is something that we have to prove within this space. And also I think there is a part of it of where it's quite annoying that you have to prove, like, and go, look how the world has marginalized me so much, hence why I found my power. But there also is something quite powerful in saying, I am all of this, and despite this, I can still stand up for myself, and I have a voice, and I'm going to use it to benefit my community. So I think it's one of those double-edged swords of where there are times where I'm like, why do I do this? But then I remember the love for the planet, the love for my community, and the love for people, and that kind of grounds me.
Amazing. Thank you, Daze. Our next question is for Eli. And the question is, do you find presenting work creatively, obviously you have your play at the moment, encourages more engagement in the issues you're trying to promote or advocate against?
I definitely think so, because I started to, the conversations about the play that we're creating now started 4 years ago now, 2021, 4 years ago now in 2017. And it was with a leader from the Advocacy Academy, this amazing human being who had been like our change maker. So one of the leaders whilst I was still in the process. And then by the end of it, they were like, let's have a conversation. I have an idea about a play. And I thought, yeah, it's just going to be a simple play. We're going to write it, probably going to put it on, like, fine, it'll be done. 4 years later, process is still going. We've encountered so many themes. It's like every time we read the script and then re-edit, it's like, okay, we need to fix this. Would it be too stereotypical if we mentioned this or that aspect of, the stereotypes and whatever? And it's just like constant conversations around like what happens and what actually, impacts the Latinx community and how we can involve that in the play. So yeah, I think it definitely, just working with the arts, and even if you were to just write a play about something, you will end up having a political debate with the people that you're writing with. You just will, because plays, their themes are class, money, the like politics, government. Definitely it will just lead you to conversations that blow your mind. And then the play, it's beautiful, because then you kind of end up on this journey that's unexpected, but also very interesting and so rich that you're just like, wow, like I hadn't thought about that before. This is going to be great when like we finally are able to put it on stage and people are able to, not just because with activism, you can be in a room and you can talk to people about, what it is to be a Latinx British-born woman and having dual identity. I can go into a room and I can talk about that. But putting on a play that deals with those issues is just wow. It's something else entirely.
Amazing. Yeah, and like you said, as a theatre maker, you're exploring those issues, as well as, once you present the play, offering that to the audience as well. Yeah, brilliant. Tré, I can see you nodding as well. And my next question is kind of led on to that, because I know you also do a lot of creative work with your poetry and your writing. So how important have you found creative and artistic work to be in your activism, and has your creative writing influenced your activism in any way?
Well, writing as a form, I would say, is inherently political, because once upon a time, certain communities will be marginalized based on education. Like let's take African people, Black African people, like during the slave trade, you were barred from learning how to read, which means you couldn't learn how to write either. So for a Black person to use their skills as a writer to liberate people and communities, and I think that's really powerful. When you look at it historically and then tie that to what's happening in the contemporary, I think that's really important. In terms of my own art as well, I think it ties back to the last question as well, that arts is a really good way to engage people on subjects that they might not think that they like or feel a connection to. So I worked on a play, 2018, on a man called Walter Tull. For those who don't know who he is, he was one of the first he was a mixed race officer in the British Army during the First World War. He's often said to be the first, but he's actually not the first. He's one of the first, and he was also one of the early mixed race footballers in Britain. And to do that, tied to a war narrative, this is still the height of the British Empire as well. We forget the First World War. It was a world war of colonial soldiers and British people and people from all over the world, and is inherently political. So those conversations that we had on making that play were very heated and political. People whose grandparents may have fought in the war, getting offended over certain things about, you can't say certain stuff about the war. And in this country, we every November, you must wear a poppy. Like there's that narrative there. So doing that play on Walter Tull, I did learn a lot, and the people that I worked with learned a lot as well. And they began to see the war narrative a bit differently. So when it comes to art, and doing that play on Walter Tull, I know I could get more people to watch a play about Walter Tull than come to a lecture about Walter Tull. And I think that's the point. As long as you can get the message out in a way that's in a way that doesn't not say I think it's not be respectful about people's views and whatever. I think that's the way to go. I think my art tries to do that. But even when you do try to do that, you'll get someone upset, as I have been trolled before. But if you're an activist, you will have been trolled. If you haven't been trolled yet, you will get trolled. So yeah, art is political. Writing is political. Anything that involves people is political. So yeah, I think that's as much as I'll say on that one.
Very true, very true. And I'm a big advocate for theatre. I studied drama at uni, so yeah, I'm on you with both of you. Ellen, my next question is for you, slightly onto a different topic, but what you do a lot with digital accessibility. So what is that, and why is it important?
So one of the misconceptions around the online world is that it is more accessible, and that is true in some ways for some people. When we talk about disability, it's barriers that make people disabled. Humans come in lots of shapes and sizes, and with different things, like different ways their brains work and different ways their bodies work. And barriers could be, for example, there being a step to get into a building, or it might be that the font in a book is really, really small, and those are barriers that mean that person can't access things. In the online world, which is something that people have shifted to as a result of the pandemic, sometimes that can be something that creates more access for people. So for example, working from home for me as an autistic person is so much better and more accessible than working in another space, because I can control the environment. It's much more, I don't have to commute. There's lots of good things. But for lots of other people, the internet can be really, and digital access can be really challenging, because, for example, many videos aren't captioned, their interpretation isn't provided. There are specific, for example, hearing aids that can like Bluetooth stream your laptop thing, but they're not covered on the NHS. So there are several, many deaf people are having to rely on paying out of pocket. It's like $3,000 to just be able to participate in their meetings. In terms of navigating the internet as well, lots of things aren't provided with image descriptions and alt text, which are slightly different things. One is more simple and one is more in depth. But if you have difficulty seeing the screen, or you can only see certain details, the internet can be really, really tricky, or using the internet and software can be really tricky. On the other hand, there are also lots of accessible things, even things like GIFs, for example. Lots of them can cause seizures, and it's not something that's considered. I've seen so many brands before. I've had friends be triggered to have epileptic seizures because the brands have just decided to use this really flashy GIF, and it's not something they consider. And I think it's something that, especially as we move into this increasingly online world, we need to both be holding social media accounts to account in terms of the accessibility features they provide, but also in terms of teams that are using the internet for whatever it is. It might be that you're creating a handbook, you're developing a website, because some screen readers can't read certain websites. There's so many different things to consider, but essentially a lot of it comes down to considering disabled people and thinking, how might this be something that we need to do something about? But a lot of the time disabled people are just forgotten, and it's, disabled people aren't a minority. It's a fifth of the UK is disabled, has a disability, and therefore you're missing out on a huge majority of people, and most of those people are, for example, working age. So there's just a lot of things, but I think it's also a reason that we need to get more disabled people who want to work in those areas to be able to work in those areas, because there's so many times where I'm like, you can tell that there's no disabled people on your team. And that's true for other things too. I'm like, I can tell that no LGBT people were involved in the making of your LGBT BLT. It's like, firstly, did you not get the message that the queer community is all vegan? It's just kind of really obvious to me. And I think there's, conversations around brands engage. I do a lot of work with different brands, and some of them engage really well and some of them don't. And sometimes it's just down to like whether they want to stick a rainbow or something, or to say something about disability, or if they actually want to work with us and get involved. And I just did a slot on BBC The One Show yesterday about the Sunflower Lanyard scheme. And what was really nice about that is they came to me a week before and said, we want to do this segment. What do you think? And I said, here's 8 things you haven't considered. And lots of times when I do something like that, especially because it's important to me, lots of media people will run away because they don't want to go into the conversation more in depth. They want it to be simpler. And actually what they said to me was, okay, they went away and researched it themselves, and then they came back to me and said, so we've refined our question considering all these other issues. So they weren't saying, oh no, we're not going to bother thinking about that. They went, actually, we're going to use that information to make our question better. And that was a really lovely experience, to actually work with a team that had done their research, and the presenter as well had done so much thorough research. It was, and I shouldn't feel grateful for people doing the bare minimum of their jobs, but you get to this point where you just have to, because you're so used to either not being able to access it yourself, or if you're someone like me, my friends can't access it. Something that I do want to shout out in terms of digital accessibility is something called the Stay In Club, or the Stay In, which is a virtual online pub run by disabled people for disabled people. And they have, for example, pub quizzes that are on Zoom and fully captioned and BSL interpreted. There's lots of kind of access information for both disabled people wanting to get involved with social activities, but also for people. There's actually a conference coming up for people who work for businesses or individuals who want to improve their digital access. So there's going to be a whole thing, and you can find them on Twitter. But yeah, I highly recommend that for all people to get involved with. It's like £10 if you're an individual as well. It's not major.
Brilliant. And that one's called Staying In, is it?
The stay in as in like a spin on the word for pub.
Okay,
yeah,
fantastic.
Really cool. I'm very here for it.
Thank you for shouting that out. And absolutely what you mentioned as well, representation. That's why representation is really important. A quick question, actually. So you talked about digital accessibility, but one thing that I found really shocking is that there's still some tube stations that doesn't have accessible exits. I was like, what? I can't believe it's crazy.
Most of them aren't accessible to people with like who use mobility aids, for example. You are extremely limited in how you can navigate London. In addition, there's also a lot of research going around that's been done right now. I really recommend Transport for All, which is an organisation that's been researching into this, but the implementation of LTNs, low traffic neighbourhoods, and how that's impacting disabled people, because it's an interesting overlap with the climate, for example, is when you're trying to pedestrianise areas to create less pollution and to create safer areas with breathing, you're actually oftentimes at the same time whether intentionally or not, making it so that certain disabled people can't get out and about. And I always, in this pandemic especially, it's been interesting to see how many people's responses, well, just don't go out the house then. And for some people, disabled people, that's their reality. But also when people say that, I think in my lifetime, we institutionalize people. It still is legal, though it's being changed now to keep people sectioned under the Mental Health Act for being autistic. There's so many really kind of insidious things, and I think right now with the pandemic, there's an opportunity to change the conversation around disability, but it hasn't happened.
Absolutely, yeah, and that definitely needs to change. Thank you, Ellen. I'm going to pass on the question now to Daze, since you mentioned the environment. Good lead on. So Daze, you obviously have worked with Extinction Rebellion quite a lot, and they've been on the news and around social media. But do you find there's kind of any common misconceptions about Extinction Rebellion? If so, what are they?
So many. I think the big one is that they're racist. Just to jump out there, that they're not racist. There are a lot of ignorant white people who need education, and there is so much that XR is working on and doing to create that. We have amazing trainings and amazing people who actually work on decolonizing the mind, as that's one very core part of our regenerative culture. There is no way that you can learn how to care for one another if you don't actually understand what the issue is. And we're all about telling the truth, so we're very explicit about that. And even I know that there's a couple in Cambridge called Carl and Alima, and they do what's actually UK-wide known training, which is 3 hours into the beginning of decolonizing your mind. They take people through a journey of self-discovery, of where people come out and they're openly at the end of it, they're like, I had prejudice against people, Black men who wear hoodies. I have prejudice against Black people with dreadlocks. And they start to unpick all of these prejudices, because we have to remember, one of our regenerative culture and our principles is that we have all grown up in this toxic system, and we all hold parts of this toxic system. Even me, XR actually was the beginning of me feeling comfortable with my Blackness. I've always, from being in boarding school, you are one of the only Black people. I'd faced very vivid racial abuse, whether that's being I've had rocks thrown at me. I've had my house being literally, someone tried to burn down the boarding house because there were too many. You can fill the blank. So I've seen what racism is, and I know that that's not Extinction Rebellion. And I feel that that's a very common misperception. Our principles and values basically say that. Our third one is saying that we welcome all and every part of everyone. And that means that we welcome people of many different races, many different ethnicities, many different religions, and our community groups show that. From, I know that I'm part of the XR Disabled network, where we create disability advice on activism, on our own protests, learning different sign language interpretations for meetings. For example, if you see lots of XR people going like that, that is applause. So this is how we include people who are deaf or hard of hearing in our meetings, just as one part, whether it's, we do the mic checks when we're at protests, which is also quite a weird one. But it's a way that we learn how to include everyone within it. And I feel like what we acknowledge also is that we're in a real big learning process. We are trying to decolonize our minds and our last generations and try to sort through all the trauma of how many generations. So it's not going to be something that can be done over 2 years, because we are babies within this environmental movement. So that's, I think, something that's quite, you know, I feel like if enough people were wanting to engage in an honest conversation, they will get an honest answer. And I do think that we need to start talking about it more and more explicitly, and which we have been doing over the last year.
Amazing. Thank you, Daze. And that's a really good point. You know, whoever you are, whatever movement you're part of, there's always going to be people out there that have unconscious biases or that haven't done the work. And that's why training and learning and educating is so important. Absolutely. And yeah, on the topic of environmentalism, back to you again to Daze. But, you know, as more people are becoming aware of the need to make their understanding of the climate and ecological crisis more intersectional, and vice versa, like especially since the amplification of Black Lives Matter, more people are realizing that anti-racism work also, you know, includes environmental racism. So, you know, what are your thoughts on intersectional environmentalism?
You can't have environmentalism without intersectionality. There is no way. There is no way you can do it. And as I said, like regenerative cultures is a way to find holistic health. You can't have a healthy body if one part of your body is not healthy. That's not how it works. So I think intersectionality is something that needs to be talked about when it comes to environment. You know, I feel like, at least for me, I know that the beginnings of the toxic system laid in before colonialism, but colonialism is a very, very prevalent one, where we have learned how to own people, take people, use people, and abuse people. And we do the exact same things to the earth. We take resources from the earth. We use the earth in a way that we want to, regardless of the earth having to rejuvenate itself, or us even seeing ourselves as a part of the earth. And the ecosystem that surrounds us. We separate ourselves, and that's what happened with colonialism. And colonialism, you know, this is just a different form of it. This is the same behaviors repeating itself again and again and again. And the only way we can solve this is by looking at these issues of how we treat people. It has to come from this core effect, because, you know, like if we sort out the carbon, what's going to happen when we continue to abuse? And that's what we have to see as it's one connected to the other, and we will not get climate justice without looking at the intersectionality of the issue that's at hand.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Daze. Tré, changing the topic of conversation slightly, but who has been your favorite organization? You've worked with many, many, many different organizations. So who has been your favorite to work with, and why?
I think the one that I think I enjoyed the most when I gave a talk at for prison probation service, actually. The prisons are notoriously underfunded, and the guys that, well, the one I went to was it was a men's prison, and I gave a talk there on Black history. I gave a general Black history of the UK, of Britain, from Black people in the Roman era, of which there were quite many of them of mixed heritage, African mixed heritage backgrounds, all the way up to modern day with Windrush, the Windrush scandal, and all that stuff, and even like disproportionality within prisons, talking about stuff like the Lamy Review, for example, which came out in 2017, and I think the prison, like, they were really, really grateful when I came, and that is not something that I always get with other institutions. I find, I think on the outside we take a lot for granted. We have access to all this stuff, and then a lot of the guys in prison are some of the smartest individuals I've ever met in my whole life, and that's someone that did the undergrad and is now doing a master's, who is around academics 24/7, and some of these guys will put these academics with PhDs and professorships to shame, to be honest. But like this, a degree doesn't make you smart. I'll just say that out loud. Having a PhD after your name doesn't make you smart at all. But a lot of these guys in prisons throughout Britain, they're some of the smartest, intellectually gifted people I've ever met. and these are also the same people that as children would have been written off by their teachers, like I was, essentially. The only difference is that I went through the private system and not the state system. And I know if I went through the state system, I would have been put through a pupil referral unit, and that would have been like the school to prison pipeline. It's a beast. And a lot of these guys, young people who are in prison, a lot of them in the audience were younger than me. I'm 25. I'm 25 now. There's a couple of guys there who are 21 and 22 years old. Yeah, that's probably one of the best events I ever did was at a prison, and that was October 2019. Yeah, I'd say prison probation service, probably the best client I've ever had, to be honest. Yeah,
sounds really fascinating, and also that there's so many issues with the criminal justice system
Mhm.
that needs to be changed. So that's brilliant that you're doing work there, and a lot of your work is anti-racism work and to increase and improve the representation of Black communities in the UK. And do you feel sort of under pressure as a visible representation of the community? And if you do, sort of how do you navigate that pressure?
Sometimes, but then I also see a lot of people like me doing excellent work in that community as well. You're by yourself sometimes in your community, but then you see stuff online from other people who are doing this work with equal passion as well. So I would take one example, the Black curriculum, for example. They've been doing this stuff for years, and I've been watching them for years, and I think they're brilliant. And then activists in their own right, specifically Black activists who are from Britain, doing work in Britain, doing this work. I think you see them, especially since the murder of George Floyd. You're by yourself, but you're not by yourself. There's people out there doing it as well, so it's not completely lonely. And I don't feel I don't feel it as a burden as probably I once did. But what I will say is that a lot of this stuff I do is often it's often depicted as a US problem. This did not start with George Floyd. Okay, it didn't even start with Stephen Lawrence. There's a history in this country of Black people being killed by racists. That goes back to colonialism, and colonialism happened in this country and outside of this country as well. British colonialism happened within this country to the Black people that were in this country during the time, and were treated a different way. And then also in the colonies as well, so African continent and the Caribbean, and even on the Indian subcontinent as well. So yeah, I don't feel the burden with it as much as I once did when I was younger. And I've been in activist spaces sort of since I was 14 years old. So, because my mum used to do it. She ran a Saturday school in Northampton, and I grew up in that culture of doing good for your community, and that's very Caribbean, I think. In the whole Saturday school movement during the 70s and the 80s, and yeah, and I went to Saturday school growing up, and I was sort of shown that my Blackness was not a bad thing. At private school as well, your Blackness is seen as a bad thing. They'll tell you that your skin color is horrible, your skin is horrible, and that your race is disgusting. And that is Boris Johnson racism in a nutshell. Like racism to me, that's what it was. It was the stuff that we see Boris Johnson criticised about on the news. Is the stuff that I experienced at school. That's the sort of language that is very much the epitome of that very class of racism. Whereas racism, I think generally it seems a very working class thing that upper class people don't do, but they do it, but they're very subtle about it. So yeah, but I don't feel any way about feeling lonely around this activism work, because I see people doing it all the time. But yeah, I won't say anything else on that because I'll start monologuing. So yeah.
No, absolutely everything you said, and it's such a sign that there's so much more that needs to be done. This is just the beginning. But thank you so much, Tré. Eli, So you mentioned, you know, your work with, well, your training with Advocacy Academy and all the amazing things. I actually lived in Brixton for 3 years, so I lived quite close to where Advocacy Academy is. So I've seen it walking past. But so you spent a year training with them, or it was perhaps slightly shorter. But what was the most important thing you think that you learned in your training?
Oh, that's a tough one. You learn so many important things. I think one of the main things that stuck with me is we love quotes at the Advocacy Academy. If you come to HQ, you will literally see quotes all over the place. And I think one of the first ones that I ever saw that really impacted me, and it just stayed in my head, was, if you're not angry, then something's wrong. Something is wrong if you're not angry. And the reason that stayed with me was because there are so many stereotypes that say, oh, fiery Latina, or, you know, Latin women are like rude and aggressive and they have attitude. And it's like, it's not attitude. It's just years and years and years of misogyny and sexism and, you know, all of that indifference kind of just bubbling up now, and like, enough is enough. So when I read that, it kind of gave me it took off this blindfold that I had, and it made me realize that the anger that I had inside was allowed. It was something that was normal. It was like somebody just gave me a green light and said, hey, boo, you're allowed to be angry. If you're not angry, you know, there's something really, really wrong with you. And it just kind of made me think of so many people that I know within my community that are angry about things. Like my mom is angry about things. And when I talk to her about the political side, she's like, yeah, but I can't really do anything to change it. You know, I'm just one person. I'm like, bro, there's a whole community out there. I'm like, there is literally a whole community out there behind you. You are not the first person to think this. You are not the first Latino mother to think this. You're one of many. And the fact that you feel this way is okay. Like, it's justified. If you're not angry, then that would be an issue. And yeah, it was just the way that they teach you to use your anger within the Advocacy Academy. It's something that I'd never seen before. It's something that I'd never experienced before. You know, you always get taught that anger is a bad thing and it's what naughty children do, or it's what girls with attitude do. And it's not something that white people do, because white people are so like, oh, I'm fine, I'm calm about everything. And it's like, okay, so what do I do with this anger? But once you learn to, as Tré was saying, like, you really do learn to change your language as well. And in the Advocacy Academy, they don't teach you to change the way you speak, because you are who you are, you grew up where you grew up. But yeah, there is this lesson in, like, if you're in a room with people of power, white privileged old men, if you speak a certain way, they will listen to you, because you know, they'll think, she's speaking my language, and it's more respected. And it's just that idea of like, I'm angry, but I'm not going to shout at you about it. I'm going to tell you in this manner so you understand. I know what I'm saying. In my head, I'm saying something else, but out loud, I'm going to say like this. So that's always funny to me as well, because it's like the little things that we've been taught in the Advocacy Academy, but the main thing has to be the anger thing. It's just that justified feeling of like, it's okay that I'm angry, but now I'm going to go out into the world and do something about it.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think so many young people are furious at the injustice in the world, and it's brilliant that there's a way of, you know, they taught you how to use that anger. Absolutely. I wish we could sit here all night and chat, but time has gone on. So unfortunately, we're going to have to finish the individual questions, but I do have one or two questions for all of you. So I think the first one that I'll ask is, so what advice would you give? So obviously this platform is particularly aimed at for young people, and so what advice would you give to young people, I guess, or a person of any age who wants to get involved in activism or advocating for social change, but just has no idea where to start? What kind of advice would you give? feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
I think it would be like listening to your intuition. I think that's what I would give. I feel that throughout most of my life, I kind of was told, oh, you're not quite smart enough. You're not quite good enough. You're probably a bit too brown. You're a woman. You should be quiet and be small. But I knew that I wasn't meant to be small. You know, I was meant to take space. And when I found a way to really listen to what I want and what I can give, and also like intuitively find how to get into activism, it changed everything. It was this like a quite a finding agency and then kind of going with it and finding confidence through it, you know. And it is, especially as young people, I think it's so beautiful. Young people are the change makers, and you know, I care very little for some of the old people who don't realize this. Young people have this openness and this fire that burns so deep inside, and this is why we are so powerful. And in our youth, we should use our youth as an agent, like a fuel to fuel our agency and fuel change. So I think that's something also to consider. You know, youth have power, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because they're trying to belittle you and they're trying to lie to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Daze. And my final question, which I'm hoping that everyone can answer very quickly, is if you had a microphone right now and you could say anything that would be heard by the entire world, what would you say? So Ellen, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can go on this one. I've been thinking about the pandemic a lot, because especially now we're getting to a point where, for example, vaccines are becoming available. We're kind of developing solutions to the pandemic in terms of like actually this, you know, combating this virus. And I think especially coming, you know, I have friends who don't know that the AIDS crisis happened. I have friends who don't know what HIV really is, and it always baffles me, or their response to this pandemic has baffled me, because I can see that we've had drugs that effectively treat HIV for 30 years, but there are still millions of people living around the world with untreated HIV and dying of AIDS, because they are seen as, either because they are denied that healthcare or that healthcare isn't accessible to them. And I mean, in the UK, PrEP, which is a drug that can be used to treat HIV or make it so you can't pass it on, that only started getting rolled out last year. The NHS refused to fund it before that, and it still isn't widely available. And so when we're talking about this pandemic and we're talking about vaccines and cures and all these things, we've got to remember that this is healthcare is a social justice issue. It's not something that exists in a vacuum, and it can't be something that we talk about outside of the context of race, outside of the context of disability, because, you know, for example, lots of the testing centres, lots of the vaccine centres aren't accessible to disabled people, the people who are most at risk of the vaccine. And so, yeah, I've just been thinking about that a lot, that there's, firstly, everyone should learn about the AIDS crisis, and watching It's a Sin is a good place to start if you want a heartbreaking but excellent way to get into that. Because, yeah, I don't know that if I was LGBT, the school never taught me about it. I mean, school also never taught me about colonialism at all. I grew up in, like, I think also, you know, you can learn. I grew up in the white, like a super white area. I didn't know it was okay to say that people were black. Like, it just wasn't a conversation. And I was talking about LGBT stuff without knowing that colonialism had a role in how, like, LGBT people are treated across the world, and how different genders are, like the gender binary being a colonial construct, and there's so many things that just weren't taught. So yeah, learning and also healthcare is social justice.
Amazing, thank you. So one sentence for Daze, Eli and Tré. What would you say if you had a microphone? Go. Daze.
I think I would say, well, I've got two things I would say. I would say either love and rage, or I would say care, fragility, and duty, because I think those words tell so much. And especially for love and rage, I even sign off my emails with it, because it's the love that we have for each other, our planet, our community, people, but also the rage of being angry. We need both of them to make the change that we need to see.
Thank you, Daze. Eli.
A lot of pressure. I would say, well, first of all, I would just tell everyone to love themselves. I think that is something that everyone needs to practice. Love yourselves, and if you feel like you want to change something in the world, it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter if everyone around you says you will never achieve it. You will always find someone to fight with you. There will always be someone to be by your side, even if it takes you years to meet that person or that community. So as alone as you can feel, keep going. Don't ever give up, especially as someone who is a mental health champion, you know, like, keep going. It's so important to be told that, you know, the fight continues, and as long sometimes it can seem so long and so hard, but you will get there in the end, and you will be so happy that you didn't give up.
Great message. Thank you, Eli. And your sentence, Tré?
I won't repeat what everyone else has said, but I do agree with everything people have said so far. I think in terms of activism, I think it's important just to research everything. And because when you research stuff and you know things and you read, you can then challenge violent structures. And I'll start with the two things. I'll start with capitalism, because capitalism underpins all of these things, especially climate and racism. And going off the back of the earlier points about intersectionality, which is also taught on my master's, essentially as a taught framework. It's about attacking inequalities within inequalities, and for a lot, you can't pull those things apart. So intersectionality, I think, is a term that everyone needs to know. It needs to be popularized properly throughout everyone's vocabulary. And there's so much reading on this that people can do. So when we say racism, it's not just a single issue, because there are no single issues. It's racism intertwined with class, sexuality, disability, ethnicity and culture as well, because ethnicity and race aren't the same thing. So you need to look at the intersections between all these things, and that's in some cases that's it's massive. So yeah, especially with COVID as well, like the intersecting inequalities, it's huge. Yeah, that's what I'll
Thank you so much, Tré. I'll put away my microphone. Okay, so we have actually gone slightly over time. I'm really sorry, but I do want to I did say there was a Q&A, so we're just going to push through. So we have one question on our Q&A, which is from Georgia, and Georgia says, Ellen, your appearance on the One Show last night was so fantastic, and it really shed new light on the current situation with disability during the pandemic. What would you say is the best way for people to access face mask exemption cards without buying into the corporate bandwagon?
So this is, for context, this is a not a rainbow lanyard. This is a sunflower lanyard, and it's a hidden disability symbol. And what this question is getting at, so essentially what's happening is that the company that makes these companies are buying from them or manufacturing fake ones and then selling them for profit. Now, that is bad because it's exploiting disabled people, and it's also making it people. For example, Lawrence Fox has tweeted very publicly that he bought one of these so he can get out of wearing a mask. And that's what the report was about. The interesting thing with this is actually the company that, I talked about this, but I talked with them for ages, so it wasn't included. But I don't actually have a problem with other retailers selling them. And I'll tell you why. This is owned by a private company, a private for-profit company. So they're also capitalizing on disability, even if it's with good intentions to kind of create awareness. And this was created 4 years ago for an airport. It wasn't created for the pandemic. So how to buying into the corporate bandwagon? Good question, because right now the solution is designed to generate profit for this company. It's not designed for disabled people by disabled people. And there are alternatives to this as well that say, for example, I'm mask exempt. There's bright yellow lanyards which actually say what you need. This is just kind of like, I might need some time, I might need some extra support. It doesn't actually mean mask exemption. So I would also recommend, if you want to have a badge or another symbol that's maybe obvious, you can put on a lapel. you can buy from a disabled creator. And that's what I have a lot of, you know, that might say, oh, I'm nonverbal sometimes, amazingly, considering I chat so much here. But yeah, so you can also get these from supermarkets and other shops, but the difficulty there is oftentimes it relies on staff believing you, and it also relies on staff knowing what the thing is. And some people think it's a very fashionable accessory. I personally think it goes well with the hair, but you know.
Great, I love it. Thank you for answering that question. Yes, Daze, I can see you put your
Yeah, you can get it from Sainsbury's, and also you can actually go to TfL and like ask for it online if you do have an exemption, and they give a list of all the things that you can use for your exemption, so you know that you can actually have one.
You can also get a free badge that's like, I need.
Yeah, I've got a badge, yeah. And it's a badge that shows it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, both of you. So sadly, we have come to the end of our time together. It's gone so quickly. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our 4 incredible activists for taking the time out of their very, very busy schedules to speak to us today. And thank you all for tuning in. And this will be uploaded online as well. So I'm just going to go around quickly now and ask the activists to share their social media tags if they want to, or anything like, yeah. So yes, Ellen, I'll just start with you.
So at the moment, my brain just zoned out then. Things to promote and things to, you know, those behind me. You can find me on the internet at Ellen__Jones. I'm Ellen Jones, the purple haired activist, not Ellen Jones, the journalist who writes for a million different things. We get each other's emails sometimes. It's quite funny. But that is me. And I also run an account on Instagram called disability.lgbt, which is also the name of the site that I'm building. And support over there is appreciated because last week I got attacked by the American alt-right. So I had 80,000 people come onto my tiny account, which had at the time fewer than 1,000 followers, and just like pile on. So I had like woke up with, yeah, a million things being like, you deserve to die, and some really horrific, like promoting genocide messages, which was fairly horrific. But yeah, if you want to just like see like purple gay disability, radical or not radical positivity, but queer joy, Ellen__Jones.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ellen. And Tré's put it in the chat. It's
Yeah.
at Tré Ventour ED at the end, or you can go onto his website, which is tréventour.com. Daze. Oh, brilliant. You put it in the chat.
Yes, I've just actually done a talking conversation with another disability activist around accessibility online with the Wellcome Trust. So you can have a look at it, and it's called Supporting Ourselves.
Amazing. Thank you. And Eli. Oh, you put it. Yes, great. Everyone's put it there. It's Eli _not Ellie, Instagram and on Twitter. And please check out the play whenever it comes out. It sounds really interesting. I'm really excited to see it. And yeah, so if you want to follow and see what everyone gets up to and support their work, please do so. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me or us at Alexandra Palace at creativenetwork@alexandrapalace.com, and enjoy what's left of your Thursday. Thank you all for coming.